Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar Overview on Prader-Willi Syndrome. My name is Andrea Jones. I'm here online with you from the DDA Eastern Shore Regional Office in Salisbury, Maryland. Before we get started, I'd like to go over just a few things about the webinar system. On your screen, you should see the webinar interface in the upper right-hand side of your computer. You will see things like audio, questions, and handout. To hear this audio, you may have selected to use your computer speakers, and if everything sounds okay, that's great. If you're using your computer speakers and you have poor sound quality or the audio is not clear, please try using the telephone option. Just go to audio and select telephone and then follow the instructions as your dial-in information will be displayed. Most of you should have received an email from me this morning with the presentation attached. So you may have printed it out and it's in front of you now. If not, no worries, you have the opportunity to download and print the presentation by going to the interface on the right. Scroll down and locate the handout section. You should be able to see it and click today's PowerPoint presentation and save it and print it out at any time during the presentation. You will have the opportunity to submit questions by typing in your questions into the question pane of the control panel. Select the question pane to get access to submit questions. Again, you just scroll down the interface window and locate questions. You may send your questions in at any time during the presentation, and the questions will be addressed during the Q&A session after each section of the webinar. Our presenter today, Cindy Hay, from the Training Education Consultants Group, is here with us. I'm now pleased to turn it over to today's presenter, Cindy Hay. Good morning, Cindy.
Good morning, Andrea. Good morning, folks. I want to welcome you to this. This is the first webinar that I will be doing, but I have presented on many different things, as Andrea said. Today we're going to be doing living with Prader-Willi syndrome. I'll go ahead and present the PowerPoint presentation. Hopefully everybody can hear me well. Andrea, anything is going on. During this presentation, I'll be doing an overview, and most of the information gathered here is going to be from the Prader-Willi Association of America, my personal experience of working at Chimes down in Delaware, and I was a behavior analyst for one of the group homes that served folks specifically with Prader-Willi syndrome, and books by B.J. Golf. And I'll go ahead and explain that later and show you exactly what she does. So welcome. Living with Prader-Willi syndrome. Today's objectives, I'm going to go over the basic genetics and how the hypothalamus and pituitary involvement drive folks who have Prader-Willi syndrome into certain characteristics. Now, having Prader-Willi syndrome doesn't mean that I have no other characteristics. Everybody is a person. However, there are some very specifics that have to do with eating and eating drugs that are incontrollable with folks who have Prader-Willi syndrome. So we have to have food safety and certain group home supports for folks with PWS. There are benefits and challenges, and then, of course, we'll have questions. First thing I want everybody to focus with, we're going to begin with this and end with this. If a person has PWS, food, thoughts of food, fear of not getting food will always be on my mind. This is for adults. I want us to start to focus on the next bit of training with empathy, not sympathy. We also need to understand that we're going to be working with folks that long-term behavior change from negative, natural, or imposed consequences are not going to necessarily change my behavior as it comes to it eating and the desire to eat. We're going to learn from it, we're going to enjoy it, and we're going to remember to increase the person's enjoyment on life. Talk about genetics and how the hypothalamus is working with that. Prader-Willi syndrome is very rare. It still is, it always was. It's a non-inherited chromosome goof up on chromosome 15. I want everybody to look at this here. It is a life-threatening, lifelong medical condition. It was founded back in 1956. It was actually identified Not necessarily the chromosomal disorder, but the fact that there was very specific genetic, very specific features for folks who had PWS. Here's a picture here. As I said, between 1 and 12,000 and 1 in 15,000 live births have Prader syndrome. Now, a lot of people say, well, is it more prevalent now than it was before? We don't believe so. But as we show you what's going on with the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, you see this picture of this youngster, this little girl back in the 1600s. She obviously is from a very wealthy family in that there's even a picture of her. She probably had Prader-Willi syndrome. This youngster is, I think she was the poster child, right? Yeah, the poster child from 2012 who was treated with growth hormone factor, HGH, human growth factor, which helps with the metabolic rate, but not with the hypothalamus and the pituitary. Prior to even the 1900s, though, the chances of a child living through the infancy part, which I'll show you in a second, the infancy part of Prader-Willi syndrome was rare. Because ironically, when a baby is born with Prader-Willi syndrome, it's almost the same opposite of what happens when they become an adult. I apologize, I'm going to have to keep switching phones because my phones keep dying, so Andrea's going to let me know if I go offline. When a baby's first born who has Prader-Willi syndrome, it seems to be the opposite of what happens as they become an adult. The low muscle tone stays throughout life. Lethargy and excessive sleeping for an infant obviously can be a little more of a problem. They also have eating difficulties, and actually it becomes failure to thrive. So obviously back in the 16, 17, 1800s, a child who couldn't suckle, couldn't eat, perished. Therefore, many of the folks probably who had Prader-Willi syndrome in the past didn't make it. Very different than today. With infants, there's delayed milestones. Usually, for some reason, there's cross-eyed. The one eye is kind of unfocused. And there's always a hypothalamic disorder. Now, here's where the transition occurs. As a child goes from infancy to about 2 to 3, now the parents have this baby who can't eat, doesn't move very much, very lethargic. So all of a sudden at 2 to 3, they want to eat. And all of a sudden they begin to thrive. Now they're eating. They want food. They want more and more food. They eat so much and then they become normally weighted and boom, overweight. They have sleeping disturbances. All of a sudden there's extreme rapid weight gain. Now the doctors are saying, okay, put the kid on a diet. That's typically right around childhood, 2 to 3, that they really notice there's something unique here. There's speech delays, usually poor physical coordination. Ironically, there's extreme flexibility. The child may have short stature, and often though now in this generation, meaning in the 2000s, most children, if the parents choose, treat the child with growth hormone, human growth hormone, so that they will become they'll have more lean mass and they will grow into a little higher structure. And remember though, it won't take away the hypothalamic disorder. I'm about ready to show you what that's all about. Here's the hypotonia. This is what first clues folks in as to the baby possibly having a syndrome. They'll test for automatically for many of the syndromes, but right here, if they see that the baby's muscle tone is like this and it's failing to thrive and having trouble eating, they will test it for the genetic abnormality of Prader-Willi syndrome. Now here's the characteristics that occur into adulthood. Physically, people with Prader-Willi syndrome have hyperphagia. That means excessive eating. Free access to any food, a person with Prader-Willi syndrome will overeat to the point of death. It may not be immediate, but for instance, as we get into other things that go on, for example, there's lack of vomiting in adults with Prader-Willi syndrome. It's bizarre in that a person can eat and eat and eat until their stomach will actually perforate. They won't feel the discomfort of the distension like those of us who don't have Prader-Willi syndrome. So therefore, that's part of the lifelong, life-threatening situation. People with Prader-Willi syndrome also are easily fatigued, and they have low muscle tone. So if a person with Prader-Willi syndrome is eating a 1,500 calorie diet and has lower muscle tone, they will gain more weight than the average adult who eats a 1,500 calorie diet. The hypothalamus, show you how the two work together again, also causes, so the folks, I don't know if those of you who have worked with folks with Prader-Willi syndrome or have kiddos in your house, will always say they're cold, or will often say you're cold when you're feeling like it's a very normal day. Because the hypothalamus doesn't say, hey, turn on the heat hormones, the body doesn't regulate. Here's some general characteristics that don't have as much to do with body, but the person is usually close to or near normal IQ. People with Prader-Willi syndrome often are concrete thinkers, determined, and there's always a form of anxiety associated with food. And that's how we'll get into the food security in a little bit. Inflexibility to change, which is a lot of us, but also usually has a good sense of humor. Here's one that's really cool, skilled at puzzles. For some reason, and that's one of those really neat characteristics, we're not sure why almost all folks with Prader-Willi syndrome enjoy and are good at puzzles. Often very sociable, kind, and caring. Not all, but many are good at reading, which means they're very good and acute at understanding diet, what different nutrition, what calorie content can be exchanged, what is and isn't fair. However, just because I have a high IQ doesn't mean I'm emotionally mature. And we'll get into that in a bit. Oops, can you still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Cindy.
Thank you. And as I say, these are generalities, but prone to temper tantrums. I don't like the word temper tantrums, however, BJ Goff uses that term, and I will use it. With a temper tantrum, it's not just that I'm getting frustrated about something, but it's like in a meltdown that doesn't seem to make any sense to you or I. And we'll get into that and how to set up the home and the group home. Skin picking. For some reason, that seems to be a generality of folks with Prader-Willi syndrome, and we'll get into that too if we can. So here are some general characteristics of the physical outcome, general characteristics of the person who has Prader-Willi syndrome that's run by that genetic malcoding. Remember, my misfiring affects my hypothalamus. Hypothalamus controls the pituitary. The pituitary gland sends you the signal that says I'm full. If the two of them never talk to each other, not correctly, I will never, ever, ever feel full, okay? Please remember, lifelong, life-threatening condition. We'll get to that towards the very end. But even if I'm normally weighted and I have good control over my eating skills, it doesn't mean I don't still have the same basic outcome as I've had before. So in other words, I may be normally weighted for 10 years and be fairly independent. However, if the situation would come where I'd have an extra $50 and I get a hold of food, I could kill myself simply by overeating. So therefore, it is lifelong, life-threatening. It's one of the few conditions that I have had to wrap my head around to understand that we will always need some form of supervision. Okay? The next thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you, here's a little hypothalamus. Some people need to be very visual. Hypothalamus is always talking to the pituitary. Also, with the misfiring of the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland is not stimulated to kick in the growth hormone and the sexual maturity. So some folks who have Prader-Willi syndrome, most folks, don't have completely developed sexual characteristics, although they're an adult. Many of them will be very short of stature and almost be looking childlike. Men won't grow a whole lot of facial hair. Women will wear shoes, for instance, that are size 2s and 3s. And their voices usually will be very young sounding. So I'm going to go ahead and show this little short clip. It really shows and highlights how the brain speaks to the person's body. In other words, how the hypothalamus is going to kick in. This is specifically for folks with Prader-Willi syndrome. It shows you how a person's brain will continue to be stimulated by food, even though for those of us who are non-Prader-Willi, we say a person, once I've eaten, I shouldn't be thinking about food. Not shouldn't be, I don't. It's not there anymore. Let's look at how different it is for a person who has PWS. Now, Andrea, let me know if everybody can hear this okay.
50 years ago, never would have thought it was possible. The only way to view a brain was under a microscope after it had been removed from whoever or whatever. But now IT technology has pushed us to a point of understanding that we never thought we would ever get to. What happens with the advent of imaging is that we're able to view the brain in action as it's actually carrying out processes. One of my areas of research is Prader-Willi syndrome. Probably what it's best known for is the overconsumption of food and the consequential obesity that comes with that. Society's stigmatized view of obesity generally means that people take the opinion that it's a consequence of moral frailty. Somebody is obese because they eat too much. But what we're discovering now with the advent of imaging is that there may be a reason why those people eat too much. Take a regular individual and put them into the fMRI machine. And such an individual has just consumed a large meal and has reached that point of feeling full and sitting back. You'll find that although there's a neurological response to an image of a certain piece of food, it's by no means as great as it was when they were hungry. With Prader-Willi syndrome patients, that doesn't occur. They're going to be as equally responsive neurologically to an image of food when they're hungry as when they've just consumed a meal. It doesn't matter what they've just eaten or when they've just eaten, they're always going to be stimulated by food.
When I eat a meal, I feel full first of all, but then in 2 hours' time I feel I haven't ate something. It feels frustrating being hungry all the time. If you put on too much weight, we can die.
The data really helps us pinpoint where the problem is. So now we have a target area and a target problem. The fullness signals aren't strong enough. We're hoping to overcome this with an implant that could artificially stimulate activity in that area. If we could do that, then we could release people from the need to have to think about food all the time and really help them lead more independent lives.
I think it's important to make people aware of the fact that as technology advances, it's not just helping us keep in contact and get from point A to point B quicker than we could do before. It's actually helping us understand what it is that defines us as free-thinking, conscious individuals. Years ago.
All right, just take me a second to switch back. Everybody still hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. All right, the reason I wanted to show that is that as you saw the young lady speaking who has Prader-Willi syndrome, and you heard the gentleman who is the neuropsychologist, that it isn't the brain can learn to think differently. The brain is actually an organ and is driven and wired in a way for folks who have Prader-Willi syndrome so that that part of it will never change. Hopefully with the advent of different things that are going on with neuropsychology, we may be able to eventually stimulate that part of the brain so that a person's obsession and drive for food won't be so overwhelming in their life. They can't unthink it though. It's there. So we need to accept that as a fact. Folks I've worked with, love a lot, although they explained it to me until I saw it in the science. I saw how that brain was working. I truly didn't believe it. And the reason I didn't believe it is because I never had to experience it. None of us have had to ever experience that kind of drive. Possibly if someone is addicted to cigarettes or smokes cigarettes and then tries to quit, even goes for years and years without it. Every time you see a cigarette, you still may be stimulated in that part of the brain. You can't unstimulate it. I like to put that foreground out there because that's the only way we can start to say, this is true. We have to shape our group homes and things that are important for the people we're supporting a little differently for people who have Prader-Willi syndrome. So the next section, sorry about that, I forgot to go to full view. There we go. The next section I'm going to be working on is supporting adults with Prader-Willi syndrome in the residential settings. Now this section is going to be from Dr. B.J. Goff. She is the renowned expert on folks living with Prader-Willi syndrome. I'm even going to read a few excerpts from her book. At the end of the whole entire presentation too, I do have her as a resource and a great picture of the book that she uses. It's not even a book, it's more of a resource manual that all folks with Prader-Willi syndrome who are able to read, all family members and staff supporting people who have Prader-Willi syndrome should really be on the same page. Obviously, you don't have to use this book, but I have made many mistakes without using it, learned the hard way, and then when I went back and used it, I said to myself, boy, was I a knucklehead, and to learn. So from the rest of this information, this is basically what I'll be drawing the next sections from. Andrea, are there any questions so far or concerns on the beginning part that need to be addressed at this point?
Sure, there's one that just came in.
Sure.
Cindy, what age is PWS diagnosed and by whom? We have an individual who exhibits almost all of the characteristics you've discussed thus far. Is it too late to have him checked out for this? He is in his early 30s. Also, it is more prevalent in men or women.
Okay, both. Okay, that's good questions. First of all, it's never too late. It's I want to say a fairly easy genetic test. It's a mutation on chromosome 15. So all you need to do is get the doctor to say, hey, we think we may have, and they can test. It could be Angelman syndrome, which is similar to Prader-Willi syndrome, but it has a little bit different characteristics. So by all means, push to get this person tested. It's usually diagnosed during the hypotonia, infancy. However, sometimes that can be missed, of course. Sometimes it's as the child goes to school and the behavior, temper tantrums become so overwhelming, usually over food or seemingly minor injustices. But no, it's never too late. The prevalence between men and women, I've seen different statistics on that. It seems like it's more prevalent with men, but it's not a very high percentage. The group home I worked in and the ones I've reviewed usually are about 50-50 men, women. So I don't have a good answer on the prevalence, but as far as timing of the test, you can diagnose it anytime. Did I answer it well?
Sounds good.
Okay.
That's the only question on this section, Cindy.
Okay, excellent. All right, now the unique challenges, unique situations, and I am a very positive person, but I am going from Dr. Goff's book because of our timing, we have to jump right into the things that are going to impact and affect the person's life. One great thing is generally, and this isn't everybody, has a higher IQ, not meaning genius by any means, but more like you and I, the average IQ. But person can be anywhere from normal intelligence to profound impairment. Okay, so it's not necessarily a rule. One characteristic of Prader-Willi syndrome is the person will have hyperphagia, period. Excessive appetite, desire to overeat. There will be dishonesty when it comes to access to food or money, or ways to get food or money. The money is almost always for food. There probably are some type of obsessive compulsive behaviors, but I joked with Barbara about this once. Don't we all have them? But they tend to be kind of clustered, and we'll talk about that. I've noticed that it can be a blessing when folks all who have Prader-Willi syndrome live together, because some of the obsessive compulsive behaviors really highlight and feed off of each other. And it can be a curse, okay? But the thing is, if we don't address the folks with Prader-Willi syndrome, I can honestly say is the one group I would say it's very important that everybody in the home who's a resident there has Prader-Willi syndrome, or if a person lives individually, everyone who supports them really knows about Prader-Willi syndrome and other things, okay? Now, other group homes can have a mixture of backgrounds. I can have a person maybe who has Down syndrome versus a person maybe who has mild autism, and a person who has some brain injury into adulthood. However, with Prader-Willi syndrome, we really need to focus that home on the person with Prader-Willi syndrome for Prader-Willi syndrome. Self-injurious behavior can occur. Usually it goes along with the obsessive compulsive. It's kind of happening as a repetitive motion. However, when a person gets frustrated or angry, they may go and pull their hair out, cut their hair, harm themselves in different ways like banging their head. Another characteristic would be underactivity. There's certain very general physical appearances. That was one of the first highlights back when Prader and Willi, back in 19 noticed it, was that there are very specific physical attributes about these folks. And impulsivity and meltdowns. The parents of kiddos who live in their home who have Prader-Willi syndrome, it's the meltdown sometimes that can cause extreme rift amongst the home and the parents because they're hard to deal with. You watch your kid suffering and it hurts. Let's talk about the benefits and the concerns about high IQ. One of the great benefits is, and I had two of the adults who lived in the group home that I worked at Chimes, had both graduated from high school. The one young lady, Lori, and I'm allowed to use her name because she and I have permission with each other to use each other's names. She actually had some college courses and was actually a very good secretary. She could do a lot of administrative assistant type stuff. Another benefit of the high IQ is a person is often capable of doing vocational skills and getting technical skills and actually having full-time employment. But again, think about everything you do with your full-time employment and how many opportunities for access to food that, if you weren't allowed to have the food, could cause you anxiety. Just kind of keep that in mind. Most often a person's able to navigate and use public transportation. And I'll give you a story a little bit later if we have time about how that public transportation could cause some very interesting situations. Here are some concerns with the very concrete thinker or someone who can speak very logically with you. The caregiver may think the person understands their situation and therefore can control their desire or their need for food. Just because I understand it doesn't mean I can control it. Remember, high IQ doesn't mean I emotionally have control. All right? We can have the most intelligent person in the world. However, they may not emotionally be stable. All right? One thing about having a high IQ means that most folks with Prader-Willi syndrome, a lot of the folks in the home that I worked with, they could tell you more about Prader-Willi syndrome, especially when I first started working with it, than I ever possibly could have read in a book. They had read it, they knew exactly where it was. But with that knowledge comes this information that I now know that this is a lifelong, life-threatening condition. That I may never be able to do some of the things I very own twin sister can do who doesn't have the same condition. That in itself could make me susceptible to depression. Let's keep that in mind. Now, let's get down to the nitty-gritty about the hyperphagia. What does that mean? What does that look like? How is that going to affect us, whether it's as parents or possibly folks who are working with folks who have the situation, who have Prader-Willi syndrome? Remember, I am obsessed with food and general food-seeking drive. Now, as a caregiver, I've got to remember to take it out of my head that I'm going to help you unthink it. I have to accept the fact that you are going to be. It's my job to work around how to help you with your hyperphagia feel safe about every bit of food that's coming to you. All right? Food's on my mind. If there is no temptation, I will feel calmer and much more focused. Remember, I'm going to be creative with ways to obtain food that you will never anticipate. As an intelligent person and a person with a good sense of humor, I have to appreciate the creativity and document that folks on a 1,000-calorie diet and continue to gain weight, they somehow have to be having access to food. I cannot interrogate and will them to tell me where that is. I must investigate, figure it out, and help block that without being judgmental. Keep in mind, please, with the hyperphagia, specifically with the hyperphagia for the person with Prader-Willi syndrome, restitution may have to be natural, especially when it comes to caloric exchanges. But I am not going to stop doing what I'm doing to get food because of the restitution. I have some examples in Dr. Goff's book. Here's an extreme. I'm going to paraphrase it to the best of my ability. A young man who had, and I mean, when I say restitution, I'm going to say natural consequence, not restitution. A gentleman continued to sneak out of his home, I believe it was in Washington, D.C., and he would go in the streets and solicit himself, literally, for cash so he could get food. And there were they tried different things to do. They would try different situations, locks and things like that, but it didn't seem to stop him from going out. There was one night, tragically, he went out and he got beaten severely. He ended up in the hospital for a considerable amount of time with some very bad physical situations. Once he got back to the group home, there was a lot of talk about it, and he stated, of course, and this is not restitution, this is a natural consequence, that he would never do that again, of course. Within that same month, he got out and did exactly the same thing and continued to do it, actually to his death, to the surprise of his family and his staff members. So I guess it highlights, this is not, I don't want to say that situation is very unique in that where he was, but to remember, the natural consequence, even if it's severe and extreme, will not change the drive for food and the hyperphagia and the length that a person will go to get food, okay? It doesn't mean the person can't learn. Some folks may, but let's not assume that that will change the behavior. Areas that you need to think about. Again, Dr. Goff in her book does a great job, BJ does a great job of saying, if a person's on a 1,000-calorie diet or 1,200, whatever it is, and they're still consistently gaining weight, there has to be a food source. So instead of interrogating, we're going to look at different things that you and I may not think of as food sources. Food's on the bus floor. Food's in movie theaters. Food's everywhere in restaurants, and I have a couple different ways to help with that a little bit later. Condiment packets. We don't think of jelly, ketchup as food, but if a person sees condiment packets and continues to put them in their pockets, or possibly the person with Prader-Willi syndrome eating 4 or 5 packets of jelly a day, you to gain weight, whereas you or I may not. Trash cans are sources of food. Remember, again, too, go back to the fact that a person with Prader-Willi syndrome does not have the ability to vomit. Okay, so a person who has Prader-Willi syndrome may eat something that be tainted. They would not vomit and could end up in, again, a deadly situation or a very sick situation. Pet food may become food. Now, this doesn't mean everybody with Prader-Willi syndrome is going to do that. Please don't get me wrong. However, consider possible sources. Complaints of sore throat, stomach ailment, cough drops, Tums, they're food. They're food sources. A person may hoard toothpaste, mouthwash, and eat it in secret. It's not funny, but I do see humor in a lot of things. We had one young man in the home in Delaware would go up to his room and brush his teeth before dinner each evening, and then would come down, oh, I don't know, within about 20 minutes before dinner. And each night he seemed like he was kind of drunk. It was this. He was doing a few shots of mouthwash because it was food. He wasn't doing it to get intoxicated, but ultimately that was the result. So just, look at all the different areas it might be. A person may shoplift, and sometimes they're very stealth at it. It might not actually be food. There's a situation in the book, and I think it's in the video I'm about to show you. A person may go to the store and shoplift things such as video games, exchange that for money, which exchanges to food, okay? So food is always going to be the ultimate goal, okay? A person may approach strangers with very elaborate details of needing a snack or that they're locked out of their home. One of the young men who lived in the group home we had used to have pizza delivered for a surprise party to his bedroom window instead of the front door because he didn't want anybody to know. So he would tell the food delivery person to please deliver it to the window because he was having a surprise party for someone. So you have to appreciate the lengths, but you also have to help figure out how to block the areas that might cause concern. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start a video, and I'm going to switch over my phone, make sure everybody can hear it. This part of the video is from, it's an older video, but it's wonderful. It's the Prader-Willi syndrome residential staff training. I believe there's 6 sections in here, and I've used it for my groups and my group homes. It's a DVD that was done back in the 90s, you can tell by the hairstyles, out in California. I believe they've updated it. This is a wonderful DVD. I think everybody who's considering having a home with Prader-Willi syndrome folks, parents, and the people who are being supported. I really advocate people with PWS should know everything about PWS and everything that we need to do to support them so we're all on the same page, okay? All right, I'm going to go ahead and start the video. Andrea, I might need a little feedback from you to make sure it's coming in right, okay?
Okay, I'm here.
All right, thank you. Now,
As far as food-related behaviors, it is necessary that you adhere to the following 3 principles of food security.
that's the chapter we want. I just want to make sure I do it right. Here we go. As everybody can see, there's a bunch of different chapters. I'm just going to do this one chapter just to give you a taste of it, but this really hits on the main focus of setting up the group home or setting up a home for someone who has Prader-Willi syndrome. It doesn't have to be for necessarily a group home.
In this section, we will discuss behavioral
management.
First, we will discuss food-related behaviors, then behavior in general.
It'll be okay in a second.
And lastly, we will give you helpful tips on how to manage a behavior meltdown. As far as food-related behaviors, it is necessary that you adhere to the following 3 principles of food security. 1, there should be no doubt when the next meal or snack is coming. 2, give them no hope to obtain unauthorized food. And 3, as a result, there will be no disappointment that unauthorized food is not available. Here is a list of ways to manage food-related behaviors. Securing all access to all food all day and all night is critical to creating a calmer, safer home environment. Never leave unsecured food in an unattended kitchen.
Sorry.
Secure inside trash cans and outside trash bins. Menus should be posted or available to residents. When a resident questions his food portion, simply remeasure or reweigh it so that the individual is reassured. Questions about food or meals should be addressed without dwelling on food as a constant topic of conversation. Staff should sit down and share meals and conversation with the residents so that they don't feel ostracized by their special diet. Staff should not bring their own food that residents cannot also have. If special is necessary, staff should eat away from the residents. Staff should prepare residents ahead of time for events that include food by discussing how they can enjoy the food available by making exchanges with their caloric allotment. Food should never be used as a punishment. Money should not be accessible to residents without staff authorization and oversight. Even the most honest person with PWS will frequently lie and or steal when it comes to food. This behavior is part of the syndrome. If it is suspected that unauthorized food has been eaten, do not question the food consumption. For example, do not ask, "Did you eat that banana?" Rather, assume the food has been eaten and state as a fact, for example, "I see you ate a banana." Your home should have a protocol in place to address the consumption of extra calories. Do not remove food from the hands of the person unless dangerous or poisonous, as this will create a behavioral outburst. Next, we will give you a list of ways to manage behavior in general. Reduce overall high levels of anxiety in persons with PWS by providing structure, routine, and predictability to daily, weekly, and monthly schedules. Written schedules, rules, and clear expectations reduce anxiety and reduce potential for arguments. Staff should maintain low emotional reactions to help counter or reduce hyperactivity in persons with PWS. Ignore behavior that is physically harmless. Use empathy. Repeat back residents' concerns. Don't ask the question about whether a resident did something inappropriate. For example, taking money from someone else's purse. Instead, simply state it as a known fact and then instruct the person to return the item. In some instances, a financial restitution may be part of the strategy for handling the situation. Don't argue with the resident. allow residents to have the last word. Limit directions to 3 commands or less. People with PWS generally have great difficulty managing their emotions. Whatever is felt tends to be felt with great intensity. This hyperreactivity is caused in part by a defect in the brain. Persons with Prader-Willi syndrome often feel high levels of anxiety, which can interfere with the flow of the day. Reduce or eliminate the cause of the anxiety, and it will reduce the behavior problems. Lastly, we will now give you a list of helpful tips on how to manage a behavior meltdown. The most important thing about a behavior meltdown is to avoid it in the first place. Remember that once a meltdown has begun, there is generally no talking the person out of it. The meltdown must be endured and managed in as safe a way as possible. There are, however, many ways to avoid behavior problems and meltdowns. Here are those helpful tips. Remember, there is always some precipitating event to or reason for a behavioral meltdown, even if you have no idea what it is, even if it appears that the meltdown came out of nowhere, or even if the reason doesn't make any sense to you. Think ahead to identify potential stressors or situations that may cause anxiety or be misinterpreted or present some hope that may lead to disappointment. Things like your residents, once identified, eliminate, reduce, or contain the stressor to the lowest degree possible. Reduce anxiety by providing clear and consistent rules, routines, and structure. Persons with PWS are generally concrete thinkers. Write down and post all rules, schedules, chore lists, food menus, and personal expectations. Avoid power struggles because you won't win. Refer to any written schedule, rules, or agreements relevant to the struggle or misunderstanding. Remember to always speak and respond calmly. The global sense of anxiety that persons with PWS feel is typically increased by raised, critical, anxious, or angry-sounding voices. It's not as much the words you use that will raise anxiety or defensiveness. It's the tone with which you speak that will provoke hyperreactivity. Persons with PWS are hypersensitive to real and perceived criticism, frustrations, and disappointments. Use no's sparingly and be clever when delivering a no. Distraction can be a powerful tool to diffuse hyperreaction. Consider offering 2 choices to target goals, allowing the resident to choose. Logic and reason will not prevail when the person with PWS is upset and or stuck on an idea or position. Showing empathy by repeating back what you've heard, what he feels, or for one, can be helpful to get him unstuck. Listen to this person who needs to talk. The time it takes to listen and express genuine empathy is worth it. Repeating the concern you've heard is often enough to reduce the hyper emotion attached to it. Repeated question. Ask the resident what he thinks the answer is. Confirm it, and then calmly let him know that the question is all done being asked and answered. Consider keeping
I'm going to switch back. You there, Andrea?
Yeah, I'm here. The video quality was fairly poor, but we still got the idea. And
okay,
I can always
I wanted to, because it was getting way too garbled, I'm going to go ahead and switch it. But the ideas are there, and part of what I'm trying to highlight here, as you see with this video, is that it has step-by-step how to train your staff. I know that, I'm hoping, a little unique for me if I can't hear and see the audience, but that a lot of people are getting the aha factor here. That, oh wow, when I am trying to explain to Tom why he can't have a piece of candy, I'm never going to win that conversation because that conversation is, to that person, not going to stop. So they have some very good concrete ideas. Oops, sorry. Ideas and ways to go ahead and manage and address each situation in this video. They have 6 different sections. Are there any questions? I know that the quality of the video was bad and it's older, but I'd like to check in with the staff. Are there, because I have the rest of the sections in here that each one of those things they were addressing, I have in my slides, but I'd like to kind of know which direction people kind of want me to go.
Sure, there's a few questions. First question is this: are there any studies that show a correlation between PWS and drug use?
I would love to see that, and I do not know, to tell you the truth, but whoever that is, you're on the same page I am, because I'm like, boy, if we could figure out what part of the brain triggers, say, the difference between an opiate use versus maybe an amphetamine use, and we could figure out with PWS which triggers the inability to satiate with food, or I wish there were, but I don't know of them myself.
Is the act of food stealing a characteristic?
Yes.
Is it common to have PWS and pica?
Yeah, actually, that is one we're going to be working on in a second. Yes, it is. There is a higher prevalence for a person who has PWS to have pica than the average person. As far as persons with IDD or other brain abnormalities, yes, it is high with Prader-Willi syndrome. It isn't the highest.
Okay. Let me just add in a little something, Cindy. As far as some people are asking about the final rules and the settings and what kind of restrictions, that we have on, locking cabinets and such, because we're supposed to give people choices and we're person-centered, and we don't want to restrict a person's choice about anything. But let me just say that this, again, is a lifelong and a life-threatening type of thing. You're not going to let someone that elopes run out into the highway. You're not going to let somebody with PWS eat themselves to death. So if you keep safety in mind, if you let these behavior plans and these IPs go through your standing committees, and also if you need further okay, then get in touch with your regional office. Let it go through the statewide behavior supports committee, so that you know that that the restrictions that you are putting on is helping someone to save their life. So
absolutely, and I'm going to jump in on that there, Andrea. I have some information at the end. The Prader-Willi Association of America is a huge organization. They are our go-to people. Now their home is down in Florida, but there usually are associations in each state. I'm hoping that there's a parent or two, or possibly at least a member of the Prader-Willi Association of Maryland there. Those are your support folks, because I am a behavior analyst, and I thought I knew most things. And when I first went in and started working with the gang with Prader-Willi syndrome, I had to learn and relearn, and I had to go back to the organization many times to advocate for the fact we had to have a lock on the refrigerator in order not just to keep the person safe, But because if that refrigerator is not locked, my friend Lori cannot sleep. Lori can't sleep because she knows the refrigerator's unlocked. She's not obsessing necessarily about food, but she knows it's unlocked. She doesn't want to go to the refrigerator. She has to go to the refrigerator. Lock the refrigerator, and I take that out of her anxiety level. It is only fair that I do that for her, not to her, for her and with her. No, right. She want to at
and
first,
because it's a restriction.
Yeah.
Because it's a restriction, you have this documented in your IP, and it goes through your standing committee, and it's part of the behavior plan because it's a life-threatening.
And I'm with the folks 100% too. One of the things I had a real struggle with is if we had one person in the home with Prader-Willi syndrome and another person who did not have it, we had a problem. Because I can't restrict the person who does not have Prader-Willi syndrome. That lock on the refrigerator is a restriction to them. I can't be fair to both, but I can't let the person with Prader-Willi syndrome die. So I guess what I'm saying is that this is another one of those conditions that requires exceptions, but it also requires a lot of footwork. Here's what we can do. Let's keep moving on. I think hopefully this will answer some of the questions, Andrea. Was there any more that you wanted me to address right away? Because I do have the pica towards the middle, towards the end here.
Okay, let me just read this one more. Can someone have PWS with some of the signs and not be identified by being able to compensate and assimilate well and never know there is a diagnosis? Or is it always obvious and dysfunctional and physical traits and behaviors, et cetera?
In other words, can you have a little bit of Prader-Willi syndrome? No. Can you have some of the characteristics? I gather that's possible. However, you're going to have you're going to have the hyperphagia. You're going to have the inability to vomit. You're going to have, unless treated by growth hormone at a younger age, shorter stature, much higher muscle, much lower muscle tone, more fat to muscle than the average person. You're also going to have to live on a lower calorie than the average person. So in other words, a person who has Prader-Willi syndrome will never get to the point where possibly they could eat a 2,000 calorie a day diet and stay normally weighted. They will always have to have less calories than their peer. So those certain characteristics will be there. If they're not there, it would be a total exception, and I'm not aware of it. Most folks, as far as developing fully sexually, don't completely mature. However, there's been an exception to that. Now, up 10 years ago when I first started doing this, no one with Prader-Willi syndrome that we knew of had ever gotten pregnant, although they wanted relationships with each other, and of course, we want folks to have relationships with each other, and we encourage it. However, that has happened now, but it's only been one. So, there's always exceptions, I guess, in everything in the world. However, these are some basic concrete rules that I would say are inherent in folks with the Prader-Willi syndrome. Again, I said there's also Angelman syndrome, and there's one or two other syndromes that are very similar to Prader-Willi syndrome that will have some of the characteristics. So that may be the avenue the person's talking about. It may be a different syndrome with some common characteristics. Okay?
Okay. Did you want to...
Now, here's a review of a lot of what we just saw in the video and a lot of the BJ Golf's manual.
Okay.
What can I do? Okay, so if this is what we've got this, a person's going to have a meltdown when they feel like what we feel is insignificant but very significant to them. What are we going to do? Just give up? No. First of all, I got to get to know the person. Know what's really, really, really important to them, okay? As far as the weight, we're going to try and make weight and food a non-issue. I'm going to make it very regular that I'm going to monitor the person's weight. When a person first moves into a group home who has Prader-Willi syndrome, I believe they're usually weighed every single day at exactly the same time of day. No questions, no fussing, no fighting, we just do it. If a person's on a 1,000-calorie diet and is steadily gaining weight, there's got to be a food source somewhere. Don't badger the person, but explore and investigate what's different. Is the person taking a different bus route? Do they all of a sudden have a new friend, or do they have a different person maybe they sit next to at work? Doesn't mean you have to separate them. Just figure out, does that friend possibly come in with corn chips each morning and give it to the person who asked them for it, being nice? Don't ask the obvious. Person has chocolate on their lips, don't say, did you eat candy? Okay. Actually, this is a generality in life, too. I watch parents with little kids do this all the time. Don't ask dumb questions. Okay? I see you ate candy. Okay? State the obvious, and then state what's going to come of it. For example, if a person's eating a candy bar, make sure that you have it set up in your group home. You don't do this arbitrarily, but the rule usually is then you exchange those calories during dinner time. Often the nutritionist may have either something set in plan, or you may have to call them or the nurse. Do state the obvious, but without emotional content. Again, like I said, I see that you ate candy. Not, I see you ate candy. Two different things. Inaccessibility to money and food except as prescribed. I'm not doing that to be mean. Remember, if I'm a drug addict and I know that there's heroin or $100 in the kitchen, I'm not going to be able to sit here and do a presentation on Prader-Willi syndrome. Same thing with a person who has Prader-Willi syndrome. Person who has Prader-Willi syndrome, if they know there's food or money in the kitchen and you're asking them to go ahead and learn a new skill, they're not going to be focused on the skill. So if we make it a non-issue, if I'm a heroin addict and there's no heroin anywhere in this whole county and there's no money in this county, I'm going to be able to give you a presentation, okay? As you saw in the video, meals are strictly prepared by staff. Now, in the more advanced things, and in the same video, they'll show some folks with Prader-Willi syndrome may be able to work with the staff alongside them in preparing their own meals. We want you to be independent and strong. But remember, the one area I'm never going to be able to be completely independent in is my own food shopping, preparation, and planning. I'm always going to need some support, okay? Keep menus posted. Remember, we don't want any guesses. No, I need to know what my next meal is and what it's going to be. Because if I don't like green beans, I'm going to need to know exactly what I can exchange and how many ounces of that I can exchange it for. If a person questions you, he got more salad or I didn't get enough salad, simply put it back in the measurement and remeasure it. All right? Staff, very, very important. Eat the same meal as the residents are eating or eat in private. Don't bring meals that really smell strongly in there. That is just mean. Staff, the strong smelling foods are cooking food even in the middle of the night. You're going to wake a person up. They're that highly sensitive to it. If you work in a detox, you're not going to show up drunk. All right, same thing. Remember, these people are driven by, they have this horrible curse of having this obsession with food. Don't bring strong smelling foods in there. Don't eat things that are off their diet. Just don't do it. Recreational social events. Let's center around the activity, not what's going to be eaten. Don't go to a buffet. Not a good idea. But when you do have a recreational or social activity, help me plan in my head what foods are going to be there. We can't always 100% know, but I know a lot of times some of our most challenging situations where somebody may run away ended up because they didn't understand what they were going to be able to exchange, or we didn't prepare as staff with the person what they could exchange if there was going to be big cakes. And some folks at the party were going to be able to have 7 and 8 different servings. What was my friend Lori going to be able to eat? She may have to have 1 cupcake and take away her dessert that night at dinner, which if she was prepared for, she could do fine. So make sure that the social and recreational activity is not about going out to eat. Eating is just one of the sides of it, but no surprises, okay? This form right here, see, food security for folks with Prader-Willi syndrome, this is really where you have to, again, wrap your mind around how do I keep a person safe? You don't keep a person safe by not talking about it. You do need to talk about it. But I need no doubt when my next meal is going to occur and exactly what's going to be served. I need no hope of getting anything different from that. Meaning that's why the drawers are locked. That's why my office is going to be locked so the person isn't tempted to go in and take the money out of my purse or take the lifesavers out of my purse. If I lock the door, it's to keep them safe and feeling calm, not to be mean. Also, I don't want any disappointment related to food or false expectations. If I'm expecting sirloin steak and I get a hamburger, that's a reason for a meltdown. For a person who has a Prader-Willi syndrome, that is a reason for a meltdown. I had this here at the end, but I think, especially if you've gotten the handout, this is one thing that's come from the, I believe it's Pittsburgh Partnership for folks with Prader-Willi syndrome, and it's by one of the dietitians, Linda Gorash, medical doctor, who specializes in Prader-Willi syndrome. As they write this is another thing you can use when you go to your committees to help you understand and help them understand why I need supervision in all these situations, okay? I need no unauthorized snacks, meaning we need to work with people around the folks with Prader-Willi syndrome. I'm going to show you this really cool card that is, basically it's like a business card. My whole gang, the whole gang who lived in the house, this was an empowerment thing. We want to go out to dinner sometimes. That's a part of life. That's part of being human. Okay. How do I have food security for people with Prader-Willi syndrome when I have things like extra rolls that come when I go to the dinner table? Well, this business card simply states and explains to the wait staff that the person has Prader-Willi syndrome. It explains how the person has the need to eat too much, and that we respectfully request that you do not offer us any extra drinks, any extra bread, or any extra servings. That way it empowers the persons with PWS to keep themselves secure about food and still possibly enjoy going out to dinner and not having the whole thing of all of a sudden the waitress brings, hey, here's some more rolls, because that's what we do for other folks. If the person's empowered by being able to hand the staff person the card, it's a win-win situation. All right? That's one of the ones I can help with food security here. Creativity, just one of the amazing services I provide. I'm going to read this little excerpt that Dr. Goff has here in her book, and she has quite a few, and they're really a lot of fun. Like I said, my friend used to order pizza or order cakes for folks and have it delivered to his window, which was really a good idea, because if they had come to the front door of the group home to give him pizza, then obviously he would have been busted. But instead he said, come around by my window, I'll give you the $10. He would have his pizza, no one was the wiser. So they had to have locks and alarms on the door. But I'm going to take a second and actually read this excerpt, because it doesn't make any sense if I don't read it word for word. All right. BJ says, this next story cracks me up as far as the lengths the person who lives in a group home with Prader-Willi syndrome persons might go to. The players are Michael and John from Central Avenue residence and Sarah, who lives over at Manor residence. And they all go to the same day program. Again, people with Prader-Willi syndrome do like to group together because they understand each other. She says, goodness knows how long they had planned their escapade. See, Michael had gone home for Easter and gotten stolen $50 from his mom's purse, unbeknownst to the residential staff and unbeknownst to his mom. So here he had $50. So he had control enough to not just run and spend it. He had to figure out how he was going to spend it, though. Monday evening, Randy, one of the Central Avenue players, who had a history of suicide attempts, went to therapy, which only left 2 staff on duty, and typically there were 3. Okay, got it so far. Sarah, who was from Manor, which was another residence, called over to Central Avenue, crying and claiming she was all alone in this house and staff had left her, and that the other residents weren't there, which of course wasn't true. While Sarah had one staff engaged on the phone, John opens the window, setting off the alarm, and the other staff member now comes running to his room. John tells that staff member he's going to jump out the window because he wants to die. So now both staff members in that home are engaged. Michael, the one who has the $50, runs out the front door, since the alarms in the house were already going off, goes to the corner store, buys $50 worth of food, comes back without anybody realizing he was missing because both staff members had been distracted. Okay, so now 3 players had to plan for a couple of days how to do this. But can you guess how they got caught? Because of the way things work out logically, Michael wouldn't share all the food with John and Sarah as they planned, so they ratted on him and they all got caught. I like to read that story because it's genius. People we work with the Prader regional seems like, wow, I wish I could have even thought of that scheme. But it also shows you to the great detail that I'm going to go to, the length I'm going to go to get food. It's genius. And it's also hell. You're caught in this mental need and drive to think about and seek food at all times. Okay, so lying and stealing, taking things, is always going to be part of the syndrome. It's not that the person wants to lie, but when it comes down to food, I'll fib. Here's where, as staff members, we have to keep a thick skin. I have a very close personal relationship with Lori and always will. It doesn't mean she's not going to take money, because the temptation's going to be there if it's easy access. This can pull families and staff apart. Maybe if a family member hands somebody $5 and says, hey, look, don't tell anybody. It can really cause a lot of issues for the person back in the group home when they do gain weight, and now they have to cut back calorically. Lori, God love her, at one point I didn't ever catch her doing it, but at one point she said to me, she just burst out and said, Cindy, you have to stop keeping change in the console of your car. I said, oh my gosh, Lori, I'm sorry. I had never thought about it. I thanked her for her honesty. I probably had lost $40, $50, but hey, the fact is I needed to be vigilant and I wasn't. So in a sense, I let her down. Okay, but we learn from each other. It's our job to be vigilant. Be straightforward when something happens. If I had realized all of a sudden that money was missing, I needed to stop putting money there, not tell her not to take my money. It was on me. Okay? How do we address this as a group of people working together to support the same person? Keep open communication with all caregivers. You don't want to have that one person who doesn't understand the syndrome, or someone who doesn't believe that the person really has these issues, especially if a person becomes normally weighted. Sometimes people think they're being nice and kind by not communicating to others. Maybe they give them 2 snacks each evening because they feel that this person doesn't get enough food. We need to be on the same page and have the same beliefs and understanding with the nutritionists, the doctors, each other. Write down property brought into the place and taken out, not because we want to be prison guards, but if there's quite a bit of videotapes or DVDs or games that are brought into the house and then the person doesn't have them, then maybe somebody's selling them or taking them and getting money for them. Any allegations of mistreatment, be sure that we document and communicate with each other so we don't have breakdowns amongst each other. I don't want to cause more anxiety about things by not really knowing the answer. Don't necessarily question the person, but make sure that you've got it in the communication books and that you know who to check with, how to check with the dietitian and or the nurse if you need an authoritarian. Remember too, great attempts to logically and reason with, as you saw in the video, and even though I know it was muddled, I am not going to logic you out of a meltdown. I need to support the person while they're going through the meltdown to keep them safe. If there's a disagreement and a person continues to obsess on a certain issue, I need to explain that. We'll talk about it one more time, and the question's been answered. That's one of those shutdown characteristics. It's going very well in the staff training. Doesn't necessarily just work with folks with Prader-Willi syndrome. Maybe if two people definitely have different ideas, it can translate into lots of other things. So somebody asked earlier about the stealing or lying. Dr. Golf does explain about this a lot. Some folks also hoard or acquire items without paying them. Some folks will become collectors, whether it be of postage stamps, envelopes, to the point of it becoming hoarding. Some folks will even have to get storage units because they're collecting so many things, non-food items sometimes. It can be, and sometimes is a part of the syndrome. It needs to be dealt with or worked through and with as you would with any other hoarder. But remember, the person does have Prader-Willi syndrome, so there's probably a need to collect things. There is no right or wrong about it. Most often, if somebody does take things, though, for their collection without paying for them, it's because they want the money for food. Again, I think somebody asked about the drug addiction. That happens with drug addiction and gambling addiction and things like that. Money for regular things that need to be had for the household is kept for the source of addiction, okay? Really interesting when you're setting up the group home and you're sitting there and working with the house rules with the folks you support. I remember I'd ask a lot of folks, you know, should we lock the, let's say, the activities drawer, which might not really, we don't think we have anything in there. A lot of the participants would say, for example, Lori might say, yeah, now I don't steal anymore, but I know that the newer folks who are going to move in here who have Prader-Willi syndrome might steal or lie, so we better lock it. So it's interesting how even though they do understand that it's wrong, they understand the concept, it doesn't always translate when a person's alone with the temptation of money in a drawer. Okay, any questions up to there? Because now I'm going to go into the obsession and compulsion behaviors, which mirror a lot of other folks who have obsession and compulsions. It's just they seem to take specific areas, have specific areas of focus for folks who have PWS.
Yes, we've got a couple of questions, Cindy. The first one, my daughter's 18 with PWS, IQ about 60. How much can she understand about her situation compared to the general population?
Well, what I'm going to say is I need to know your daughter. Her IQ is about 60. I would start with, I'd actually have to ask the person who's asking the question, is she a member of the Prader-Willi Syndrome Association? Because there's a 10-page leaflet they have right now of all sorts of different ways to give the person information. Mom might want to start with some of the things that you would use for maybe a 12-year-old who has Prader-Willi syndrome, but the Prader-Willi Syndrome Association of America down in Florida, and I'm going to give you the link here in a bit, will help her maybe focus on some books, some videos about what it is to have Prader-Willi syndrome that the two of them can watch together. Mom needs to learn way more about it so that when the questions come up that she can direct them towards her. I think you should try and work with just about everything you possibly can. 18 going into 25, I certainly would continue to work. If you feel like you're going over her head in issues, then you can always par back. Also at 18, I try and get her involved with the Prader-Willi Syndrome Society of Maryland. If there's not one, there's one in Delaware. Let that kiddo get involved and get to know other kids with the same thing. It can be frustrating, but it also can be very helpful because other kids can teach each other some of the things that they might need to know. Hoping that answers the question, but yeah, I'll give you the link and I'm hoping Mom can hook up with that.
Great, thank you. Another question, for folks with PWS, can they get water intoxication?
Yes. Just as easy, if possibly not easier than other folks. People with PWS, yes, we do. The interesting thing is, and might just be my experience with it, sometimes it was tough to get my gang to just drink plain water. Now, the little bit of flavored water, which has no calories, seemed to go down quickly. But yes, water intoxication can occur. So yes, we need to monitor everything pretty much that goes in the person's body. But again, if that seems to be an issue, that's probably a specific issue with a certain person. It's not like high on the disorder concerns, but yes, it certainly can concern, because as with anyone, water can intoxicate anyone. The electrolytes will go out of balance. I would also get with that person's doctor, making sure the doctor knows about Prader-Willi syndrome. How much water should I drink? And that might be the way I'd go, is, I need to know how much water this person needs each day, and what's the range over or under that will be okay. Make sense?
Sure. Sounds good. Okay. So do you have any suggestions for supporting a woman with PWS who works at a community-based job site where non-disabled coworkers give her food constantly? This woman works independently and does not have a job coach. She has recently been diagnosed with anxiety, and I am just wondering if this could be a related cause.
Yes. I wish I was speaking directly to the person. That would be, again, it's a lifelong, life-threatening situation. Do not pull the person right out of that job, but that needs to be addressed very quickly by this person's team with the person. That can be the downfall of the person, life-threatening downfall of the person working in the community. I'm not saying don't do it, but we need to know that there are so many things out there that could physically harm this person that we need to get together as a team. It's also part of the advanced training that I can do and will do with a team to help work with the entire team, to include the people out there in the workforce who don't understand it. They need at least a basic understanding. I'm not saying tell about it. They need the person, for instance, when Lori, my friend, was working out in the community, she came with me. We did a lot of explaining of what her syndrome was and why my food had to be in a different refrigerator than anybody else's, and that I could not have access to that room, meaning she couldn't have access to that room. That doesn't actually answer the question, but it's complicated, but there are ways to help. And I'd be happy to give my information later, Andrea, to this person who's asking the question.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Okay. The next question, how can I locate a PWS home? I live in Maryland. I can chip in on this. I know you could contact the regional offices throughout Maryland to try to, and if you're looking for yourself or someone in your family, someone that you know, the regional offices could possibly help you locate some kind of match. So that's what I would say with that.
And hopefully I can help a little bit. I know in Delaware we had to start another one because as we went from having folks with Prader-Willi syndrome in a couple of different homes and those who still live in the community needing homes, we had to work together with our local groups and with the state and say, we need another home or two that focuses completely on how to support people with Prader-Willi syndrome, not just another group home. So, it might be the beginning of hopefully opening doors for each other. It takes a lot of work though, but I can't say we can do it. So, does that help?
Yes. Okay. Are appetite suppressants ever a part of the treatment?
Excellent question. They did tons and tons and tons of studies. No, it doesn't work. Appetite suppressant for you and I works on the part of the brain that tells us to go ahead and kick in those hormones and say we're full. Here's the problem, I guess. Appetite suppressants for a person with Prader-Willi syndrome just makes them hyper. It doesn't give them the signal that they're full. So therefore, no, it doesn't work. Now, I'm going to, as we add this, let me take a second and do the self-injurious behavior, because just after that, I talk about some of the SSRIs that do work to help reduce the anxiety and a little bit of behavioral control, but not necessarily appetite suppressant. Okay? Would that be a good board?
Yep, that sounds good.
Okay. So hopefully everybody can see this next slide about skin picking, which is another one of those, I want to say, bizarre phenomena that tends to be very prevalent in people with Prader-Willi syndrome. It probably has something to do with that part of the hypothalamus that triggers this part of the brain. About 80 to 84% of the people who have Prader-Willi syndrome skin pick. Now, we've all had a scab before that we find ourselves all of a sudden, oh no, I just picked the scab off. We put a Band-Aid on it and usually we leave it alone. For some unique reason, people with Prader-Willi syndrome, whether they start to skin pick because of maybe an anxiety reason or there's a little boo-boo there, about 85% of folks skin pick almost uncompulsively, usually on their legs. A lot of times it's down on their legs. Sometimes it's on their hands and their arms. That young man you saw in the video, you saw that there was a Band-Aid on his head, skin picking on the head, or possibly even pulling your hair out, meaning one piece at a time, not a big chunk, or even rectal digging. But normally it's on the arms and the legs, and it is an obsession, compulsion. The person's doing it basically without realizing they're doing it. So when their hands are, even in bed at night, they don't want to do it. They want to stop, but much like the food seeking, they can't. It just happens. With folks who have possibly other issues that are going on, sometimes I hate to say they have maybe a lower IQ, but this can become a very serious issue, and the skin picking gets to the point where it becomes infected. And it's very hard to stop, because a person with a higher IQ will understand infection and understand possibly that, hey, you know what, when you're in bed at night, how about you want to put on some lotion and then put on these white gloves, which won't necessarily stop the skin picking, but usually will stop it from actually going and hurting the person. If a person doesn't understand the reason, then they're not going to necessarily be able to stop the behavior. But just because I understand the reason also doesn't mean I'm going to stop the behavior. Often skin picking occurs from old sores around the cuticles and the head and the legs. Again, it's just something we have to know is there, and there are protocols in Dr. Goff's book, and then there's also some different resources of ways that might help reduce this. It probably is part of the OCD syndrome. Whoops, I didn't mean that to happen. Whoops, I didn't mean that to happen. There we go. Some people say it might be the runner's high, the endorphins. I'm not sure. I have seen it definitely in, I think it was 4 out of the 6 folks ultimately who lived in the home that I worked with. Sometimes the SSRIs, Prozac, Zoloft, Wellbutrin was another one. I don't know what the statistics are right now. I remember that Wellbutrin was one of the antidepressants that seemed to help with mood and reduce some of the self-stimulatory of the skin picking in the folks I worked with. But again, I suggest we go to the association and get with their medical doctors or their panels of medical advisors to ask which is best. Daily skin checks, non-judgmental skin checks can sometimes help, or at least prevent or reduce infection. Some daily skin rubbing protocols. Sometimes if you get your OT involved, you can use the brushes for the sensory desensitization. Sometimes that helps. Again, we're not sure why. I was able to use this code word or a sign for a person to help them recognize they were doing it. One of the fellows who lived there, we would just, say something like oxygen, and he would then realize he was picking at his legs and would stop. He just needs that little bit of assistance. We did find, though, that if you said, Scotty, stop picking your leg, that was then putting him down, causing more anxiety, often causing, whether it be a meltdown, but just, let's be kind and respectful to each other. All right. How do we increase activity? Here, I've got a person who needs more exercise because of the lower muscle tone and the need for less calories. They need daily activity. Biggest thing we worked with our staff, I know when I first walked in there, I would have staff members sitting on the couch telling the person to go get on the treadmill. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Get out and walk together. Go out on leaf hunts this time of year. Go out on, looking at the different decorations. You got to mix up the activity and not call it exercise. Special Olympics is a great way. Plan physical activity just before a meal or a snack, because I know that my snack is coming right after it. Hey, as soon as we're done taking our walk around the block, we'll go ahead and have our snack. Put it in the schedule. Park far away from the front door, especially when somebody wants the activity. So if we're going to go shopping for a new pair of shoes, park a distance away. This is ways to sneak in activity. I do want us to, now let's step into the shoes of someone with Prader-Willi syndrome and think about body image, who I am, self-image. The parent who was asking about the 18-year-old, I'm not sure if she had or was exposed to growth hormone, which can help some, but again, it's not going to fix it. It might help me some physically. The average person who has Prader-Willi syndrome who isn't treated with growth hormone, and growth hormone isn't an answer. There are some serious risks with GH factors, so keep that in mind. But the average man's only going to be about 5 foot. The average woman's going to be about 4'11". I'm going to have low muscle tone to fat, so even when I'm at a normal weight, I'm still going to look kind of roly-poly. Incomplete puberty in males, the voice doesn't deepen, and there's going to be probably very little or no facial hair and underdeveloped genitalia. So I look like a boy when I'm a man, or I look like a little girl when I'm a woman. Women may not have menstrual cycles. They'll have very small hands and feet. And I remember the ladies I would talk about, the clothes that they had to get in the store, you have to go to the child's department. Well, I'm a grown woman. I don't want to dress in little girl's clothes. The clothes aren't made for me. So now I already am small and feel my self-esteem is impacted by the fact that I'm smaller, and now I have to wear clothes, don't have to, but that look like a little girl. That would be demoralizing. We can work with that. We can help the person find more adult clothes, though. I am an adult, and I wish to be treated as an adult. I may physically look and sound like a child, but I am an adult. It's our job as staff and role models in home, public, and private conversation to treat the person as that. If a person is having a meltdown, they are an adult who's having an emotional problem with something that right then they can't control. They are not a child misbehaving. Keep that in mind. Here's a picture of a youngster who, and if you saw that picture, remember in the beginning of the youngster back in the 1600s who was never treated, obviously, with GH factor. This young fella, if he hadn't been treated with GH factor, body structure would pretty much stay like this. He was treated with GH factor, so he's going to have a lot more muscle tone. He's going to grow taller. But it's got to be done before puberty. So, a lot of folks will say, can I go give the person growth hormone now that she's 28? I don't think so. But again, that would be something a doctor, you'd have to get in touch with the doctors who know about Prader-Willi syndrome and how it can help. But please remember, this young man will have the benefits of a physical stature. He will not quite ever reach normal stature, but closer. However, remember, the hypothalamus is still going to be affected. So he's never going to have that food satiation. He's going to be able to possibly even eat more calories, but he's not going to have a vomit reflex. He's going to have he's going to get colder than the average person. He is always going to have obsession with food. While it might change and mature as he gets older, he always has the capacity to overeat to the point of death, okay? So even though his body may change, we have to keep in mind, we can't let our guard down about the possibility of what could happen. All right. No behavior occurs for no reason. As you saw in that video, they were holding the one young man back, and I noticed with the group that we had, before we knew a lot about Prader-Willi syndrome and we had a group home with Prader-Willi, we had a lot of meltdowns and a lot of folks that would maybe throw things at us, at each other. It was our fault. We didn't structure the environment much so that there were rules and regulations and support and involvement of the folks with Prader-Willi syndrome along with their families. So there was a lot of anxiety and a lot of tension and unseen wrongs that would end up in meltdowns. And when a person ends up in a meltdown, a lot of times staff members who became aggravated, frustrated, possibly would raise their voice or try and use stern commands. It didn't work. We're not going to be able to out-reason or out-bully any emotional breakdown with anyone, okay? No behavior happens out of the blue. There are times when a meltdown might seem like it's happening out of the blue, but if you investigate a little bit, you might find out that you have now thwarted someone possibly from, and there's an example, thwarted somebody from the possibility of food or treat that you totally don't know about. Here's an example. Change from a movie to a dance or a doctor's appointment and a date. And this is one of those, you know, we always think, oh, these meltdowns are happening for no reason. Their mood outbursts just don't make any sense. They do. Sometimes you can figure it out, sometimes you can't. An example of the, you know, not needing to know the schedule, person might need to know the schedule for more than one reason, okay? One of the examples she gave us in this book was the group had planned to go to a movie. Okay, great. The house had planned to go to a movie. Then it was switched to a dance, and one young lady who absolutely loved to dance, you would have thought she was the one who was totally geeked about it. So Susie, we tell everybody, the rest of the house is like, okay, great, we're going to go dance. And said, Susie goes ballistic. She goes from 0 to trashing the house in a moment, okay? And they try logic. Susie, you love dances. Blah, blah, blah. Turns out it wasn't about the movie or the dance. She was going to meet a friend who was going to give her money to buy a treat at the movie. You switch it to a dance, which she would really like a lot more, and you just took away the very thing she wanted. So the meltdown seemed like it came out of the blue and made no sense. And the person was totally resistant to change. It's that she was thwarted from something that she really wanted. So we need to keep a thick skin, work with the person as they're going through the meltdown, and then remember, it happened for a reason, okay? The other one was there was a doctor's appointment, and the person always loved to go to the doctor's appointment because he got a couple of sugar-free snacks afterwards. And that morning when they got him ready for the appointment, he just had another meltdown, impulsivity and aggression. Turns out it was, it was on February 12th. Well, apparently they were going to have a Valentine's party at work. And because he couldn't logically explain this, that he wanted to go to the Valentine's party and not to the doctor, it seemed like it came out of the blue. I'm hoping I'm hitting some highlights to folks out there that, so the meltdown, while it was hard to deal with, had reason behind it, and it wasn't about the person who was about to take him to the doctor. It was about something else. And although we're talking about Prader-Willi syndrome here, if we can step back a lot of times, if we come home from work one day and our husband or our wife or our kid has a total meltdown about us saying, hey, can you come help me with the dishes? Probably isn't about me and helping them with the dishes. Probably about something totally different. And so that's one of the life lessons I got here from folks with PWS. It really helped. I can adapt it to many different situations. Let's talk about, just briefly, philosophy and attitude for successful caregivers, for everybody. Listen and keep your sense of humor and be loyal, okay? One way to be loyal with people with Prader-Willi syndrome is to know as much about the syndrome as possible. It's a journey. It's a trip we need to take together. The great thing about Prader-Willi Syndrome Association of America, there's all sorts of supports online for people who have Prader-Willi syndrome. Different groups and organizations they can get into. There's a rap song the guys did. It's called "My Name's Not Willie." It's a really cool rap song. I won't have time to play it today, but it's funny as heck. But it brings people who have Prader-Willi syndrome together to be able to laugh about the fact that they got to lock up the kitchen like Fort Knox. But it's done by people with Prader-Willi, for people with Prader-Willi, and it's about Prader-Willi. It's not we who support the people with Prader-Willi. But here's kind of like a couple bullet points they sat down. We're talking about the folks with Prader-Willi syndrome and the other advisory board. This is what we want you to know. It comes in all sizes, shapes, and colors. Okay? It doesn't discriminate by race, country. It's all over the place. If I'm slim, it's due to a lot of effort by me, my parents, and my caregivers. Please don't give me food or money without my parents or my caregivers' permission. This is, again, like I said, it's by the adults who have Prader-Willi syndrome. Please keep food temptation away from me. And this is, again, this is what they wrote. The name's not Willie. Prader-Willi syndrome is not the true shame. It's you busting on me and don't even know my name. Talk to me directly, not the person with me. I'm an adult. Please understand that my muscle strength and my energy are lower than yours. I might not move as fast as you. I have hopes and dreams and goals just like you. You want them together. There's the gang. And that's from, there's a conference every year down in Florida. This is a post-workout. As you see, different sizes, different shapes, different groups, there's thousands of pictures. If you can get the person, if they can understand it online, to start to talk to other folks with Prader-Willi syndrome or supports. There's also a crisis intervention number. Simply, you don't even have to be a member. There's an 800 number that can help you with crisis intervention with folks with Prader-Willi syndrome by folks who know about the syndrome and have dealt with it. That's in some of the handout information I have here at the end, I think. I'm going to do one more YouTube link here. If anybody knows her, she's from the Big Bang Theory, but her dissertation was on Prader-Willi syndrome, so I'm going to escape for a second. Andrea, are there any questions at this moment before I flip this on?
Yes, there's a couple. If you want to go through those now, or do you want to wait till after the video?
Hang on one second. Sorry. Okay, there we go. That phone's better. No, go ahead. Why don't you go ahead, and then I'll go and do the video.
All right. Should the person with PWS be expected to repay the person he's stolen from?
It depends. Let me ask you, what would be the reason?
Okay. Laura, if you're still on.
I'm not going to give an absolute answer with that. Person with Prader-Willi syndrome is still a person. Okay. People are people. As far as expecting them to pay, if you took $20 from me, then I would expect you to give me $20 back, depending on my cognitive level, for sure, okay? Especially if it's resident to resident. This is my philosophy. Now, this is Cindy Hayes' philosophy. If it's that Lori took $10 out of my car, I expect that myself as a staff member gets much more vigilant. And I would move on, because it's not going to teach Lori anything. It is going to frustrate her, and she won't change her behavior. But if Andrea and Cindy live together in a home and we both have Prader-Willi syndrome, and you have taken my $5, then I, as a group, we have to have house rules, would expect that that $5 would be paid back.
Okay, thank you. Just looking through some more here. Somebody wants to know, do you think that the person with PWS will feel negative about if we went to the PWS website to learn more? Would the person feel negative about themselves?
I'd ask them. I'd say, hey, you know what? And this is, you know, I'd say, hey, I found this website that can help you and I understand some of the things you might need. Can you want to check it out? If you think it's something that they won't understand, then yes, look at it yourself. Usually I would walk down the road first, you know, go home and check it, or go somewhere first and check it. Then the things you think, number one, they can understand, you think that would help them, let them see. And it would definitely have to be slowly approached. As I said, the group that I worked with, when somebody would come in new into our group home, a lot of times they would come in, they were angry, of course. A lot of their freedoms were being what they felt was restricted, and they were. And usually they were very, very big and very, very unhealthy and very, very angry. But as they learned more and more about the syndrome, learned more and more about diets, and learned more and more about how and why, they became emotionally more mature. So I think I would read whatever, before I would show the person or let them know. I wouldn't go behind their back and just learn everything and not help them learn, but I'd work with it. And Prader-Willi Syndrome Association also has books that can help you even figure out where to start. I'm hoping that helps.
Yes. Okay. There aren't too many providers that I know of in the state of Maryland that support PWS. I find from experience that it is extremely hard finding someone who can train or evaluate an individual with PWS to set up a treatment plan for providers to follow. I believe that PWS is an addiction on the same level as stated before, and should be handled just as that. However, it is very hard for the providers or staff to follow a routine that they have no clue about. So in the future, can or will there be a behavioral specialist who specializes in PWS come out to agencies and give detailed and important steps on how to manage PWS and the behavior? I can answer that. If you have a specific person that you need additional consult with, and you're in a provider agency and there's someone with a diagnosis of PWS and you feel like you need more training, I would contact your regional office, talk to the professional development coordinator to try to help get a behavior specialist to come out to meet with you. I don't know if Cindy, if you do consult work with providers to formulate a plan, but that's what I would do first.
Yes, I have done consult work. It's a real challenge when you have one person living in supports where all the other supported folks have different conditions. However, right. It's doable, but it can cause extreme challenges, as I can hear and feel in how that person wrote it. The person wrote it because they feel frustration because they understand some of what's needed, but they also understand the constraints of If I only have one person who needs these very specific ways of food safety and security, how do I get it for that person without putting barriers up to other people? And how do I work, because you really need a whole support system. Even in the house that we had where everyone was so well trained in it, we still screwed up a lot, especially in the beginning, because one person's understanding of what to do would be a little different. And the person who isn't a concrete thinker can work with that. But the person who has Prader-Willi syndrome can see that as an injustice. And because they have a good memory and a high cognition, can feel like they've been wronged. So it's a process, not necessarily a behavior plan. And it's definitely needs a team. But let me let you listen to Amy Fowler. If anybody's ever seen The Big Bang Theory, I love it because she's really cool.
The honest. You may know me as Amy Fowler from the hit comedy show The Big Bang Theory, or from the TV show Blossom. What some of you may not know is I have a doctoral degree in neuroscience. While working on my degree at the University of California, Los Angeles, in 2007, I wrote my dissertation on a rare genetic disorder known as Prader-Willi syndrome, or PWS. Prader-Willi syndrome is the leading cause of childhood obesity, and it affects approximately 1 in 15,000 births. People with this syndrome constantly feel hungry. They don't have the ability to ever feel full. So without support, this can lead to life-threatening obesity, along with many other medical complications. If not closely monitored, individuals with PWS can potentially die from overeating. In addition, people with PWS suffer from a number of other symptoms, including medical, psychological, and developmental challenges. As an infant, ironically, babies with PWS are very weak in muscle tone and have no appetite, so the parent's effort is spent trying to get them to eat. The child's appetite then typically begins to increase between the ages of 2 to 4 years old, at which time the hunger begins to take over. Imagine every day thinking about food all the time, constantly figuring out when you can eat next or how you can get food. Remember a time when you felt your hungriest? Imagine feeling like that all day, every day, for the rest of your life. Kids with PWS will continue to eat and gain weight on considerably fewer calories than the average person. If not properly supervised, some individuals can gain up to 20 pounds in one weekend. Parents and caregivers often have to lock their cabinets and refrigerators to keep their child with PWS from eating. As one 8-year-old boy said to his parents when he thanked them for locking up food, "I try and I try, but my hand reaches into the refrigerator and I can't stop it." Keeping a regimented food schedule, securing food, and keeping it out of sight are some of the many ways parents and caregivers are able to help minimize the problems and reduce the stress on both themselves and their child. As the child gets older, the food issues in school and everywhere else in society becomes more of a challenge. Sadly, in order to save their lives, parents have to severely restrict their teen and adult child's freedom. As adults, many people with PWS will live in highly structured residential settings, most with 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week supervision. But there is hope. Prader-Willi Syndrome Association USA has been providing life-saving research, crisis and medical support, education, and newly diagnosed family support since 1975. With a national office in Sarasota, Florida, and chapters all around the country, they are saving and transforming the lives of people with Prader-Willi syndrome. Last year, PWSA USA answered over 1,600 crisis calls from family members and caregivers. This year's PWSA USA has seen more newly diagnosed individuals than ever before. PWSA USA's family support team provides second-to-none support, knowledge, and guidance to these newly diagnosed families every year. So please, consider helping the individuals, the families, and the loved ones who are affected by Prader-Willi syndrome by joining PWSA USA to help make a difference. Donate today or be part of a PWSA USA event in your area. With your help, they can continue to provide a brighter future for Prader-Willi syndrome. It begins with a community. Let's save and transform lives.
Okay, that's my little ad for the day, but she presents it so well, I figured why should I try and repeat it? there is the link, and I let that picture show for a moment, for the Prader-Willi Association of America. It's a huge organization, and it really is the go-to for questions. I found that a lot of the information that they've got, different books, different videos, different ways even to start organizing your community. I'm not sure what you have in Maryland. I'm more familiar with Delaware, but I have done some work also here in Pennsylvania now, always with adults with Prader-Willi syndrome. So if it's an area for kids, I'm not as well versed, but I certainly would help people find what they need with that. Basically, I go here, respect the fact that I'm an adult. Understand that I am going to lose my temper at times, and it may look like a child throwing a temper tantrum, but I'm an adult. I've had a meltdown, okay? The best thing you can do is work with me. Also remember that the person probably, when they're having the meltdown, they're not comfortable with themselves. But I am a 40-year-old woman. This is, Lori and I kind of did this together. Talk to me, not about my behavior, okay? If I'm having a meltdown, sometimes the best thing, if Lori was having a meltdown, I'll tell you about Hoover therapy now. I'll out myself here. If I had just shut up, the meltdown would have stopped a lot earlier, and I never would have had Hoover therapy. And I'll tell you a little bit about what Hoover therapy is. I was 20-something years old when I first started working with the folks who had Prader-Willi syndrome. I was probably close to 30, so I was real old. And Lori happens to be almost exactly my same age. I was called in on a weekend, so of course, that was frustrating. I'm a behavior analyst. I'm supposed to have my weekend to myself. And then when I walked in, this young lady was having a meltdown in the kitchen about the amount of salad that had been served. So in my infinite wisdom in my many years of education, after basically we had to get her up out of the kitchen because it was dangerous, there's knives in there, she then told us about, all the wrongs and the different things that our parents were and where I could go and how I could get there. And at the top of her lungs, of course, was spitting on me and things like that. Of course, I'm right in her face telling her why this is incorrect behavior and that she should behave appropriately. Finally, she gets angry enough and she tells me to make love to myself, and she runs up the steps. Okay, and in my infinite wisdom now that I also know about not only Prader-Willi syndrome, but being a big girl, which I should be, I should have just left her up there. She was upstairs. She was, in her bedroom, not doing any harm other than yelling. I, in my infinite wisdom, instead told this young woman to bring it on down here. Here's where Hoover therapy came in. What came down the steps was a Hoover vacuum cleaner, which smashed up against the door. That was my aha moment. That was absurd. I was not helping this person at all. I was not treating her as an adult, nor with dignity and respect. I raised my emotional level to meet hers. As life calmed down, when I finally shut up and sat down, I got on the first step and said to Lori, may I come upstairs? No. I said, okay, Lori, first thing I want to say to you is I'm so sorry I raised my voice to you, especially when you were frustrated. That was rude, and I'm sorry. Prader-Willi syndrome, any syndrome, that was the beginning of our friendship, our emotional caring about each other, our trying to understand each other. Her first words were, well, I'm sorry I threw the vacuum cleaner at her. So part of what I'm trying to open up here to you folks, and this is about Prader-Willi syndrome, yes, but it's also about, we also have to be able, if we want to teach somebody else to start to admit they goofed, we've got to do it too. I don't advocate anybody ever raising their volume in anybody, but it can also open doors for folks when we admit where we're weak. I had to explain to Lori, I don't understand really the caloric intakes. Let's investigate this together to the best of our abilities. As we started to understand how different we were, but how similar we were, women of the same age, that we could learn together and that we could make this work. And would it always be perfect? Would she never get frustrated with the things going on in her life? Of course not. Could I be one of her allies and one of the people who understands as much as I can about the syndrome to support her to the best of my ability? Of course I could. And that is where my philosophy as a person, not necessarily an expert in Prader-Willi syndrome, but I'm pretty good at it, I can help. Remember that on yourselves too as caregivers. Give yourselves a break. Let the person know when you don't quite understand how to help. We can't be all to everybody. It'll open a lot of doors. In order to support somebody, though, you've got to have, and I don't care with anything, if you're working with autism, you have to have a good understanding of autism to help and change, support somebody with autism. For Prader-Willi syndrome, you have to have an internal and full-fledged knowledge of what the syndrome is in order to support a person with Prader-Willi syndrome. It's going to prevent a lot of pitfalls, possibly save the person's life, save you a lot of sleepless nights. It'll also help you be able to work and relate with the parents. And parents, you're going to have to learn a lot about the syndrome and what the group homes and how, if you're going to have your kiddo have to go to a group home, well, where's the best one out there? What's the best way I can support the folks out there and help them learn, not just tell them what to do? Two different things. I don't know all the answers, but we certainly can investigate together and try and get the answer for a better tomorrow. BJ Golf says, don't lose your sense of humor when trying to figure out how to lock up the apple tree in the front yard. She's got some great stuff. I have a picture of this book here in my, in my final notes that, like I said, it's a $15 book, but I do suggest that anyone who's going to work with anyone with Prader-Willi syndrome, please get a hold of it. I don't think they're at the library, but PWS Syndrome America Society will get you hooked up with where to get it. And again, back from the very beginning, what I started with, food and thoughts of food or fear of not getting food are always going to be on my mind, okay? You're not going to teach me to unthink it. But what you can do is help me have food security, okay? Help me not worry about what I'm going to have for dinner or where it's going to be. If I know that at 4 p.m. I'm going to have 1 hamburger, 2 potatoes, and 3.2 ounces of green beans, and that's when I get my diet soda, then I'm going to stop thinking about it, at least for now. Empathy, not sympathy. Because if you're normally weighted, or even if you're 75 pounds overweight and you're on a diet, you don't have Prader-Willi syndrome. So you can empathize with a low-calorie diet, but you really, really don't know what it's like to have Prader-Willi syndrome, okay? Have empathy. I'm not going to gain, if I have Prader-Willi syndrome, I'm not going to gain long-term behavior change from negative, natural or imposed consequences when it comes to food. Just know that. It's going to help keep you alert, okay? Learn, live, enjoy, and remember, you're helping save my life and increasing my enjoyment on this earth. Questions or discussion?
All right, thank you, Cindy. We do have a few questions.
Okay.
Does a PWS person having greater amounts of depression because the various symptoms and need for food and guilt, do you have any unique preventions?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say there are some good preventions in what we're doing right now, in that the sooner we know the person has Prader-Willi syndrome, of course, and how can I empower the person? Becoming a member of, whether it be a local group of folks who have Prader-Willi syndrome, different dynamic groups, can help me focus on what we can do, not what we can't. Can it prevent depression? No better than anybody else, I wouldn't think. Because each individual, regardless of Prader-Willi syndrome or not, is going to have that predisposition, whether it be to incidental depression, which may occur and then be over, or lifelong, depending on their other genetics. Because just because chromosome 15 is messed up doesn't mean the other genetics aren't there. So you have the variation of each individual's genetics. Knowledge and the ability to recognize the fact that how a person manifests symptoms of depression, yes, I think knowing about Prader-Willi syndrome and what things may be low-level energy, like if somebody stops having much interest in whether their collection is of My Little Pony, if they're a youngster, or they really enjoy certain puzzles and that's something they really dig, and they not just one day, but maybe 2 and 3 days in a row, they stop being interested in it. Let's trigger quicker. But I think depression across the spectrum is going to be there. So I don't know if there's anything specific, just awareness is important.
Great, thank you. What are some educational implications for those with PWS? Should workloads be modified or reduced for children who move, respond to prompting, and produce written work very slowly?
But you're saying kiddos? We're talking about kiddos?
I think they're talking about children, yes.
Yes, and there's in the, if you either go online to Prader-Willi Syndrome Association of America or call them, they're great down there. There are about 5 or 6 books that specifically talk about education and educational supports of folks with Prader-Willi syndrome. And of course, you have to start with the basic developmental delays. If there's developmental delays there, you have to address that too. But yes, it specifically helps with it. Like you said, the low energy, do I need to modify it? There are very specific modifications that can definitely be tried and helped. I would go to that resource, though, to find what would be best for the child or children you're working with and how to support them in your classroom.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have comments. This is an impressive webinar. Thank you so much, Cindy.
Thank you.
What is the name of the disorder that is similar to PWS?
Angelman syndrome. You may spell that out.
Yeah, spell that out for them.
Angel, like as in like a thing with feathers. A-N-G-E-L, Angelman's.
Thank you.
Sure.
Someone else says super helpful presentation. Thank you so much, Cindy.
So I feel so bad about how bad that volume was. I played it yesterday. It was fine.
Oh, the video, right? Well, the last one sound was good. Let's see. There's one more thing. Good presentation. Thank you so much. Okay, comment. Somebody says, "Can we see the rap song?"
You know what? I'm going to try and play it again. I tried to play it earlier when I was getting coffee.
Okay.
I will be happy to play it.
All right, we'll try to play it again, and then if we can't get it, we'll close up.
It is funny as heck, though. I mean, it's great. And the other thing too is once I found it and played it for the gang down at the house, they said, "Oh, we want to learn it," and they learned it and they started dancing with it. It was kind of cool.
While you're looking for it, I'll just say that somebody else says this was an excellent and should be a requirement of any agency who's serving PWS. Thank you.
Here it comes.
My parents got the news. My 15 chromosome had blown a fuse. I was born proud of Willi, so weight stuff to lose. But you ain't gonna hear me singing the blues. No help from the doc. All my parents can do is buy some new locks. Cause I always be thinking about that ice box, so they lock it all down as tight as cord. I got proud of Willi, but my name's not Willi. I got proud of Willi, but my name's not Willi. Is always testing me. I ain't gonna let it get the best of me, cause I know my life has got a destiny. You gotta take the time
to know the reverend.
Because I'm not the same. Like I had a choice, dog. I'm not to blame. See, having Prader Willi is not the true shame. It's you busting on me and don't even know my name.
But my name's not Willi. But my name's not Willi. Prader syndrome. I can't ignore because my appetite and me is always at war.
Sometimes I get so mad that I slam the door. It makes my emotions so hard to store.
Prader Willi is my cross to bear. I'm not crying about it, because this I swear.
It ain't stopping me, because to dream out there, you see, life is like a diamond. But my name's not Willi.
How's that?
Thank you, Cindy, so much.
And that rap song is available through the association also. I think it's about $5. The gang wrote it and they got together. Everybody who sang on there has Prader Willi syndrome. So it's a great thing to dance to.
Fantastic. There's lots of thank yous coming through. I'd like to thank you, Cindy, for presenting this overview on Prader Willi syndrome. Did you have any? So I'm going to go ahead and say that this concludes our webinar today. And on behalf of the Developmental Disabilities Administration, we thank you for your participation. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.